Welcome to our webinar on capital planning and the user-friendly capital improvement plan tool for water and wastewater utilities, presented by us here at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm David Tucker, a project director here at the EFC. Just a few technical details before we get started in earnest. All participants will be muted on today's webinar, so if you have any questions, please type them into the questions box on your screen. And if you look at that logistics slide on your screen right now, you'll see the questions box is fairly small. So optionally, if you want to, you can detach that box and make it larger by clicking on the curvy arrow button in the upper right corner of the questions box. And then you can expand the size and move it around your screen. When asking us a question, and please do give us questions at any point during the webinar today, we very much appreciate that. Please state your name and water system name or organization name, and this will help us to respond to you. The webinar will last for 1 hour today, and we'll have some time for questions both during and at the end of the webinar. Once the webinar ends, you will automatically be emailed a link to a very brief, about 5 minutes tops, survey. Your feedback is extremely important to us, as we'll use your input to help us improve future webinars. So thank you very much in advance for filling out the survey. In case we don't have enough time to answer all questions, I'll select out a subset to put to my colleague, Shadi, who I'll introduce properly in a moment, to answer. And we will follow up with any questions offline that we did not get to in the webinar during the coming days. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be emailing the slides from the presentation and a video recording link to you within the next week. So if you're not able to jot something down real quick, don't worry, you're going to get it back by email. We at the Environmental Finance Center here at UNC are dedicated to enhancing the ability of governments and other organizations to provide environmental programs and services in ways that are fair, effective, and financially sustainable. And there's a number of ways we do this, including applied research, program design and evaluation, and teaching and outreach, such as today's webinar. And we have an informal motto here that how you pay for it matters. We work across a variety of environmental media, from drinking water and wastewater, such as in today's webinar, to stormwater, electricity and other forms of energy, solid waste management. If it's about environmental services, we want to help you make it more financially sustainable. We are very grateful to the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, who is the sponsor of today's webinar and the whole webinar series of which this is a part. We're especially grateful to Mr. Aubrey White, Ms. Samantha Sims, Mr. Dennis Harrison, and a number of others at ADEM for their active support and funding of this project. This webinar is an outgrowth of the 2014 Drinking Water and Wastewater Rates Survey of Alabama Utilities conducted by ADEM, who collected the rate sheets and audited annual financial reports. And those of us here at the EFC who entered the data into a database, did quality control and matching on that data, and created an online interactive dashboard tool from the survey data and supporting data. While ADEM sponsored the survey work and this webinar series and some tables and a final report that's about to come out, the dashboard itself was sponsored through the ongoing Smart Management for Small Water Systems project, which you'll hear more about later on. And that project is funded by a grant from the U.S. EPA, an 18-month project that is currently underway. Also about the survey, we surveyed over 450 Alabama utilities, water and or wastewater utilities, and we encourage you to go to the EFC webpage to look for that. Also, if you are interested in the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, or SRF program for ADEM, you'll see here the contact for that group at ADEM, Mr. James Daly, and you're welcome to approach him if you are a system in the state with any questions you have about the SRF program. As I mentioned, today's webinar is a part of a series. This is the fourth of 4 topics in the series that we've been doing across August and September. If you have missed any of the other webinars in the series, you can go to our website at efc.sog.unc.edu, and you can find the slides and the video recordings from those webinars. Today's webinar, like the other 4, has been approved by ADEM for water system operators for 1 CEH credit under the Utility Management and Finance category. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at the other webinars, we definitely encourage you to do that. So now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Shadi Eskoff, who is a Senior Project Director here at the UNC Environmental Finance Center. Shadi's going to tell you all about the wonderful capital improvement plan tool today. Shadi's worked for us for many years designing tools like this one and dashboards, also has worked on the Small Systems Project and many others. And I'm very glad that he's here today to talk to us about this valuable tool. Take it away, Shadi.
Thank you, David, and thank you everybody for joining us on this webinar. So I'll spend just a little bit of time talking about capital planning in general, and then demonstrate the EFC's user-friendly capital improvement plan for water and wastewater utilities tool. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, so from now on I'm just going to call it the CIP tool. That will be the majority of this webinar, is a demonstration of this tool and how it works, how it helps you with capital planning. And then hopefully with time remaining, depending on how many questions we might be getting, I'll talk and provide a list of other resources that might be also helpful with capital planning, and then answer questions about the tool or capital planning in general. So at this point, I'd like to encourage everybody to submit questions throughout the webinar, and I'll try to answer them as they come in, or we'll just queue them towards the end and cover the rest of them at the very end. And we'll take questions about capital planning in general as well, not just about the tool. You're welcome to ask about the tool, but if you have questions about capital planning in general, please feel free to ask that at any point. So to start, I've got a poll question to see who is in the audience and kind of what everybody's expertise is. So we're going to launch a poll right now, and please select all that apply to you. So do you personally work on any one of these 5 topics? So identifying capital projects for a utility, so basically creating a capital improvement plan, determining how to pay for capital projects, calculating or reviewing utility rates. If you're a funder or a regulator, do you review CIPs from other utilities, maybe if they're applying for SRF programs or any other kind of funding? So do you look at CIPs in general? Or none of the above? You don't work on rates, you don't work on capital projects at all. So financial management in that sense, on the rates and capital projects, you haven't had a lot of exposure to yet. So I just want to get a good sense of who's doing what. Have you seen CIPs, and how much I should introduce the topic. Thank you for responding, and just looking at the results real quick. We've got about half of the audience has not worked on rates or capital projects, so I'll spend a little bit of time trying to introduce capital planning in general, at least the process of it in general. But everybody else seems to have had a mix of experiences either looking at rates or looking at CIPs or working with CIPs in general. So thank you for answering that. So let's talk about capital planning. I mean, if you've got a water pipe that looks like this, you've got leaking pipes, you've got failing infrastructure. The question always comes up. I mean, every utility has something to pay on the capital side, and the question is, how do you pay for this? And really, there's just if you think about it broadly, there are 2 types of ways that you can pay for infrastructure. One is to just wait for something to break and then find the money somewhere to replace it or to rehab in order to bring it back up to standards. Or you could plan ahead, save enough money, and replace or rehabilitate your assets ahead of time before failure happens in order to keep your system running at optimal conditions. There are pros and cons of both approaches. We've seen from our experiences with utilities across the country that smaller utilities sometimes prefer the first option, or maybe by necessity prefer the first option, which is to just cross their fingers and hope that nothing bad happens, which might not be a good process, because usually if something fails and you have to replace it right at that moment, it might be difficult to find the assets, it might be expensive, and you might not have enough savings ahead of time to be able to absorb those unexpected costs. On the other hand, preventative rehab and replacement requires you to spend some time actually planning things out and putting money aside to pay for capital projects before failure happens. So sometimes you have to get board approval, and you have to get the board and customer buy-in for why you're trying to replace assets. This is a critical process that all the technical assistance providers and EPA and AWWA and state funding agencies, everybody would like to see utilities plan ahead and have some kind of formal capital planning process in order to avoid those unexpected costs and those situations where you may not have enough money to pay for them. So I'm going to talk about general process for capital planning, and based on the first poll, it looks like some of you have already worked on CIP. So this process might not be exactly what you do. I'm here just trying to generalize sort of what the process might look like for a lot of utilities, but knowing that there are some differences from utility to utility, of course. So the first step to capital planning is to know what assets you've got in your water system. And that just means just take an inventory of your assets. It could be just a simple spreadsheet. It could be very extensive documentation, or it could be just a single piece of paper that you just scribble down. If you're a very small water system, you can probably scribble down every single piece of your assets on one sheet of paper. The best practice is to include at least these 5 items with each asset. So what is the asset, the name, description, the location of the asset, the age of that asset, so when did you install it, how old is it, and the reasons why these 5 things appear here is because it will help you with capital planning process later on, and I'll explain that. So the age of the asset, the name, the location, the current condition of the asset. So is it running up, running fine, everything looks great? Is it vibrating too much? Is it producing a lot of heat? Is it about to fail? Is it leaking oil? What is the condition? Does it need to be replaced pretty soon? How critical the asset is, which means things like pumps. If a pump fails and you don't have any redundancies, that could be relatively catastrophic for your water system, because you won't be able to provide water to at least subsections of your customer base. But there are other, if you have some redundancies with your assets, if one of the assets fails, if one pump fails, but you have a second pump that would manage to compensate for the first one, then the criticality of failure for that asset is not as high. So assessing how important that piece of equipment is to your overall system in terms of providing service and providing water quality that meets the standards is an important part of the inventory. And the last thing is, how long do you expect this asset to last? So when you install the assets, pipes might last, I'm not sure, about 50 years, depending on what kind of material you use. It might be a little bit longer, might be a little bit less. Mechanical equipment might last you about 20 years or so before they start to show signs of failure. So how long do you expect this asset to last? And combined with the age of the asset, you'll have some idea of when you should start thinking about replacing or rehabilitating those assets. So that's the first step, create an inventory. Second step is to prioritize and rehabilitate replacement of the assets. So what's more important to replace? And that could be a combination of which assets seem to be running close on its expected life. When do you expect it to be, when you expect it to start dying or start failing? And the sooner that's going to be, then the higher priority that asset will be in your replacement cycle. And also a combination of the criticality. So maybe something that will last you 3 more years but is highly critical to your system, it's a higher priority for you to fix that or to replace that now than an asset that might fail next year, but you have redundancies that would compensate for it. So you can look at your criticality and conditions and expected life and have some subjective or qualitative assessment of which assets need to be replaced or rehabilitated first, and create a priority list in that sense. And so by doing so, you'll have a timeline. If you list all of your assets and you know what the expected life is, you'll be able to, and you prioritize which assets need to be rehabilitated or replaced first, you'll create a timeline for when all of your assets need to be rehabilitated or replaced as well. So the next 20 years or 30 years, each year, what do you expect to change? At this point, you've created what the industry would look at as an asset management plan. So you may have heard asset management plans, you might have heard of capital improvement plans, and the question comes to us sometimes, what's the difference between the two? The way that I see it, this is, up to this point, this is a basic asset management plan. It's looking at your current infrastructure and coming up with a plan for when you need to rehabilitate or replace each of these assets in order to keep your water system conditions up to standard. The next step, so we're not done yet, the next step now is to start creating a capital improvement plan, which means take that asset management plan that you've got, which might look at a 20, 50-year time horizon, and zoom in a little bit more on the more recent or more near-term years. Look at what you've got planned to be rehabilitated and replaced in the next 5, maybe 10 years. Add on top of that any new assets that you need to add. So the asset management plan looks at existing assets, but you might be expanding your system, you might be replacing, or might be adding some new treatment technologies. So add on top of that any new assets that you expect to build or to install in your system, and then start estimating the costs for each of those projects. So you would create a capital project that would cover rehabilitating, replacing, adding assets, or removing assets in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years. And for each project, you would try to price out what those projects are. It doesn't have to be absolutely precise, because capital project costs will change over time. But if you're looking 5 years down the line, then you should be able to relatively accurately predict what those capital projects might be. Don't stop there, which is what we see sometimes with capital improvement plans. With, you might have already calculated what the projects might cost you, but it's really important to think about how you're actually going to pay for that. And that's usually a combination of whether you're going to use your reserves and pay in cash for capital projects, or if you will take out any bonds or loans to pay for some of this infrastructure, and then you'll have some debt service to then have to pay in the next 20 years. You might also be lucky enough to receive some grants, depending on where you are. Those are extremely competitive, and I would not recommend relying on grants when talking about replacement of assets, regardless of what stage you're in. So determining how you're going to pay for these capital projects, you might find out that you've got too much front-loaded, and you might have too much to pay in the next couple of years. That might be unaffordable for the utility. You don't have enough reserves to pay for that. So then you might go back to your plans and adjust your rehabilitation replacement cycle in order to better spread them out over time. And that usually requires a little bit of back and forth between the staff and the council as well. So now you've created a capital improvement plan. You know what the projects are going to be in the next few years. You know how much it's going to cost you. You know how you're going to pay for these projects. It's also very helpful and also kind of important to then take this a step further and to try to estimate what the impact will be on your rates. So even if you're going to take on debt to pay for the infrastructure, you're going to have debt service to pay for in the next 20 years or so. That's going to have an impact on your rates. You will have to raise rates in order to pay for these capital projects that you've identified in your capital improvement plan. And even if you've got, if you're planning on using cash, then do you have enough revenue available or enough cash available to pay for these capital projects, or do you need to raise rates now so that 3 or 4 years down the line you have enough cash in your reserves to pay for the capital projects you have identified. And then the last thing is also it's very helpful to get board approval for the CIPs. That way when you're reviewing your rates every year, you can stand up and show them what the capital improvement plan is that they've approved, talk about the capital projects coming up, how much it's going to cost, and then the reasons why you're asking for a rate increase if you are asking for one. So the CIP tool that I'll be demonstrating in just a minute helps you with that step right here, estimating what the rate increases are required in order to fund your capital project. So the tool will basically take your CIP plan and look at all the costs that you've got planned out, and it will try to tell you how much you need to raise your rates in order to be able to have enough in your reserves to pay for your capital project either through cash financing or debt financing. I have a couple of poll questions to ask right now, and the first one is, do you currently have a CIP in any form, either a formally documented CIP or an informal list of capital projects that you have in mind, or you wrote it down somewhere but it's not a formal document? No, you don't have a CIP, but you're working on one or not. And then if you're not a water system or if this doesn't apply to you, feel free to check off the fifth option too. So this will give us an idea of who's working on CIPs and in any sense as well. All right, thank you. Let's look at the answers. For those that do have, or this question applies to you all, a lot of you have formally documented CIPs, which is great. And if you feel free, if you want to share how many years your CIP covers, please put that in the questions box just so that we have an idea. Are you looking at 5-year CIPs, 10-year, 20-year CIPs, or is it just a 1-2 year CIP? Some of you do have informal lists of capital projects, and then very few don't have a CIP at all. Some of you are working on one, so hopefully this tool might help you. Actually, this tool should help any one of you that have a CIP, whether it's formal, informal, or you're working on one, because it will either way help you identify what the rate increases might be. Next question that we're going to ask is, how do you currently pay for these capital projects? So those of you that have, whether you have CIPs or not, how do you pay for rehabilitation or replacement of assets? And you can check all that apply. Again, if this question doesn't apply to you, the fifth option is a not applicable answer. So do you pay through cash reserves? Do you pay out of your reserve accounts? Do you use debts? Do you hope for grants and principal forgiveness loans? Do you apply for those? And then maybe you don't have capital projects. And, let's see what the answers are. Thank you. I am so grateful nobody said you don't have any capital projects, because every utility has them. So I'm glad that everybody caught up on my trick question there. A lot of you are using cash reserves. There's a mix of debts, and then some of you are also looking at grants and principal forgiveness. Like I said, those are very, very competitive. So if you're planning on that, maybe you already have grants. That's great, but don't always rely on those, and just to be financially conservative, you might want to just assume that you have to use some of your cash or to take out loans if grants and principal forgiveness loans are not available. Thank you. So next we'll jump into what the tool is and what the tool does. And this is the CIP tool is available on our website for download. It's free for use, free to use. Water systems can use it, funders can use it, consultants can use it. Anybody's welcome to download this tool and use it. It's an Excel tool, it's a do-it-yourself sort of tool where you can fill in some inputs and get some outputs out of it. There are no copyright issues here that would prevent you from using the tool. Feel free to do so. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us with questions about how to use the tool. It is a tool that we try to generalize for everybody, so to do so, we had to put some assumptions and some limitations on the tool. It doesn't do everything for everybody, but hopefully it covers a lot of the tasks that a lot of utilities are interested in. The tool itself was created originally with funding from US EPA, as well as the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources. But there's nothing very specific about North Carolina in this tool. This tool can be used in Alabama or any other state. So as I mentioned before, what the tool does is it summarizes your capital needs, and it has a 20-year planning horizon. So if you have a 20-year CIP, then you can go up to 20 years. We see answers from my previous question in the chat box that your CIPs cover usually about 5 years for approval, but you sometimes plan for further. So in this tool, you can go further. You can go up to 20 years in your planning horizon. And what the tool will then do is estimate the rate increases needed to fully fund the capital projects that you put into this tool, based on whether you're going to use debt or cash financing for each of the projects that you identify. The inputs is a mix of just some basic information about your utility. So we need a little bit of information about your current rates and water use, so that we can calculate what the revenues are that you generate from your rates, and then the tool will then adjust your rate in order to try to make sure that the revenues keep exceeding your expected costs. What your growth rate is in terms of number of customers or changes to water use patterns, what your current reserve level is, and then a little bit more information about the revenues and expenses not related to the capital projects, but just generally your operating and maintenance costs, or pre-existing debt service or other types of expenses as well. So a little bit of information about your water system. Again, you can see it's going to be quite simplified. You've got a lot more data at your utility than this tool can handle, but you can simplify your data and put it in here to get some estimate on what the effects will be of your capital plan. The next set of inputs will be your capital projects. And for that, we need information about each project, including the timeline. So when will you start? How long is each project going to last as far as construction? What the costs will be? What the financing mechanism will be, if it's debt or cash, capital reserves or grants. And if you're using debt, you're going to have to estimate what the terms of the debt are, how many years and what the interest rate might be. Or if you're going to use capital reserves, then you can specify at what year do you want to start raising rates in order to save ahead of time, to have enough revenue available in your reserve fund to pay for those capital projects. So how early do you want to start saving for those cash pay-as-you-go capital projects? And then changes to O&M expenses. So sometimes the capital projects will change your O&M. You add new infrastructure that might increase your operations costs or maintenance costs as well. Or you might be removing some infrastructure and installing some more energy efficient processes, which will then lower your O&M costs. So this tool allows you to adjust for those too. That's it on the input side. On the outputs, you'll receive, both in terms of tables and graphs, year by year projections of what the revenues, expenses will be, and what your rate increases should be in order to be able to fund your project. And let's see if there's anything else. So how the tool actually projects the rate increases is not something that you need to adjust. This is what the tool does automatically. It will look at your reserve levels right now. It will look at how much you're projected to produce, to generate in terms of revenues from your rates and your water use levels, adjusting for growth levels and changes in water use trends. It will look at your expenses, whether it's O&M expenses, pre-existing debts, or the capital projects that you've got planned, whether that's debt service, new debt service, or cash reserves that you'll be paying for capital projects in the same year. So we'll look at your reserves, it will add the new revenues, it will subtract out your expenses, and it will come up with a new end-of-year fund balance or end-of-year reserve level. The tool then, you set what the minimum level of reserves you want at the end of the year, and the tool says, all right, if I find a year where the end-of-year reserve level is lower than my target, I'm going to go ahead and adjust what the rates are and recalculate what the revenues might be, and keep doing that until your end-of-year fund balance at least meets the target that you've set. So the tool will always try to adjust your rates in order to make sure that your end-of-year fund balance exceeds a target, a minimum target that you set in this tool. And it does that by trying to also smooth out rate increases when possible. So you won't find that this tool will say, you're good to go for the next 3 years, and then 4 years down the line, you're going to have a 50% rate increase. It will try to smooth it out and say, all right, well, if you need a 50% rate increase in 4 years' time, you might see a 10%, 20%, 30% rate increases over time as well. This is a simple tool, which means that there are some limitations to how you use a tool. And we keep adjusting, we keep updating this tool, so always look on our website for the latest version. We always have the version number up there. I think right now we're either at 2.5 or 2.7. I'll find out when we pull it up. But you're limited to the options and assumptions included in the tool. It's difficult to add any more complexity. So that means if you got rate structure details or nonlinear growth of expenditures or water use, or if you have more specifics on revenues, you can't really model that in the tool. Again, this is a tool that's meant to be used by as many utilities as possible. So there's not too much that you can change in flexibility. However, if you, especially if you're a small water system, we're sometimes able to customize this tool for your needs as well. And you'd have to contact us to talk about whether or not that's feasible. This is an important caveat / warning / disclaimer / reminder, which we have in the tool as well. It says that this model estimates, and the key word is estimates, rate increases needed to pay for the CIP, but does not prescribe the rate increases. Please do not use this tool to go to your board and say, oh, we need a 3% rate increase because this tool says we need a 3% rate increase. That's not how the tool is meant to work. This tool is meant to give you an idea of what the rate increases should be. The next step for you is to do a rate study or a rate review, just your annual rate process, to really fine-tune your analysis and find out what the rate impacts will be. So this tool is meant to give you a general 20-year planning horizon as far as what it looks like your rate increases might be based on your project. Then you can go back and adjust your project as needed to see, to make sure that your impacts might be feasible for your utility. But then every year you have to go in and really do your analysis outside of this tool as well. One more tip before I pull up the tool is when you first download this tool off of our website, usually you'll see this yellow bar at the very top that says Protected View. You have to click on this button that says Enable Editing. You must click it in order to be able to use the tool, otherwise you'll be uneditable. All right, so where can you find this tool? You do so by going to our website, efc.sog.unc.edu, and then you click on Resources and Tools and scroll down to find it. And I'll demonstrate that real quick. I do want to point out quickly, though, for utilities in Alabama, we have a web page that has all the dashboards, the rates tables, the rates reports that David mentioned as part of the rate survey that we've done with ADEM earlier this year. And to do that, you also go to our website, and then you click on Programs, Drinking Water and Wastewater, and then on Alabama Water and Wastewater Rates and Rate Structures. So if you haven't looked at those yet, please feel free to do that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you on our website how you can find the tool. So this is our home page, and you go to Resources, scroll, hover, and then just hover down to Tools, click on Tools. And you'll scroll down until you see Capital Improvement Plan tool. Click that, and this is where you'll see this is the current version number, so it's version 2.5. And what the date was that we updated. And you click on this button, this link right here to download an Excel file to your computer. And I won't do that right now because I already have it loaded, but that's how you can access the tool. When you first open the tool, so this is it. I'm demonstrating the Excel file itself. The first thing you'll see are the instructions, and the instructions tell you that the blue cells right there are the input cells, so this is what you can change. Everything else is blocked. You may be able to click on something, but you won't be able to change anything. We've protected the worksheet so that the formulas, the integrity of the formulas remain protected. But you can click on these buttons as well to move from worksheet to worksheet. There's 2 worksheets for data inputs and a worksheet that shows you the 20-year projections, and then the dashboard that shows you all the graphs. And I'll try to quickly go through some of those right now. So the first thing is you click on Start, and this is where you put information about what the name of the utility is, whether you're a water system, a wastewater system, or both, what the current fiscal year is. And if you change that right there, it will change the model, so it will know that you're starting your analysis from fiscal year 17, and then you add 20 years on top of that. I'm going to switch that back to fiscal year 14, which is where we have the default. You put in a little bit of information about the volumetric rates and base charges. So if you selected water and sewer up here, you want to show what the total monthly, what the total charges are for water and sewer rates. So the monthly base charge or the minimum charge of water and sewer combined, in this case, is $12.34. And then the volumetric rate at about 5,000 gallons a month. Again, water and sewer combined. So in this utility, they're charging $5.67 per 1,000 gallons at around 5,000. And then if the base charge includes any consumption allowance, you would put that in here in thousands of gallons. So this 2 means 2,000 gallons is included with that $12.34. You can see that this is not a very sophisticated, very detailed rate structure model. It's again, on purpose, been simplified. If you have multiple, a more complicated rate structure, if you have an increasing block rate structure, try to think of either a weighted average rate or what the rate is at 5,000 gallons if you have multiple tiers, and look at that 5,000 gallons here. We pick 5,000 for a lot of utilities. That's the consumption that across the country that's close to what the average is, but a lot of other utilities, we know that the numbers are different. Again, if you need to tailor this, we could, but in Alabama, 5,000 should be close to what the average is. By doing this, and you can see that when you click on any of these cells, you'll get some pop-ups with some information. You can't change some of these cells. You can't have negative numbers in some cases. It will spit out a error message before moving on. But just based on this information, the model will estimate what approximately what a residential monthly bill is for 5,000 gallons. So in this case, it's $29.35 for water and sewer combined. Or a very high one compared to other utilities, but that's for this model. Information about your existing capital reserves by the end of fiscal year 14. So we're in the current fiscal year 14. You do have to project what you think your end of year capital reserves will be. Whether or not you have a separate reserve fund for capital projects doesn't really matter. In this case, just think of capital reserves as what do you have at the end of the year in total that's going to be used for capital projects and not for O&M or for other expenses as well. So in this case, this example utility, they're expecting a $1.7 million at the end of this fiscal year for capital projects. This is where you put in the target that you want. So I mentioned that you specify, I want a minimum target of X number of dollars by the end of each fiscal year for assigned or dedicated to capital projects as a buffer for any changes in revenues or so. In this case, they put in $2 million as their target. So they know that at the end of fiscal year 14, that $1.7 million does not meet their $2 million target, which automatically triggers the model to project a rate increase for next year to at least get them up to that $2 million by the end of the year, in addition to anything else that they need to add because of the capital projects that they've got planned out. And then also, if you've got any interest earnings on your reserve funds, you would put that in here, and the model will account for that. On the revenues and expenses side, so aside from revenues that you might be getting, actually, sorry, I apologize. In addition to revenues that you might be getting from your monthly charges of customers, what other sorts of operating and non-operating revenues do you see? So what's your total revenues that you will get in fiscal year 14? This number has to exceed this number down here. That $4.8 million is looking at that $29.35 average bill and multiplying it by the number of customers that you've got and times 12 months. So this utility is getting $4.8 million out of the rates that we've set here. Well, how much do you expect in total? That total has to exceed this number. So if I try to put $3 million here, I get this warning message that says, please enter a number that's greater than this expected revenue from rates in fiscal year 14. What is your annual non-capital expenditures? So your O&M, your administrative, your lab, your consultant fees, your legal expenses, all of your non-capital expenditures, you would put that in here. And then we allow for a linear growth of those expenditures. So we know that operating and maintenance costs go up over time. You can put in at what rate that will be going up. Here's where you may put some of your pre-existing debt service or any other non-capital expenditures that you know is going to happen in a very specific year. So in this case, they've got debt service of $20,000 for the next 5 years, and then $5,000 for 3 more years after that, and then nothing else planned. This is not where you put the expenses for the capital project that you've got planned in the future. This is looking at previous capital projects that you're still paying off over time, or other types of O&M expenses that you know are going to happen here, but not capital, not related to the capital project that you're putting into this model.
Shadi, we have one quick question I'd like to interject here from a member of the audience, which is if we have a minimum and maximum reserve level established by our City Council, is it possible to put both of these numbers in the model somehow?
Thank you. And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. You can add the minimum here because the minimum target is what the tool uses to project necessary rate increases. But unfortunately, we don't have this tool set up so that it wouldn't have target, or it wouldn't have a reserve level that exceeds a maximum target. That's good that you have that. A lot of utilities don't have that maximum target as well. But what you would be able to do is, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, you will be able to see what your financial reserves will be at the end of each year. So if you know what your maximum is, let's say it's $4 million, then you would know how many years it would take before the model projects that you will exceed that. And then you could plan ahead of time. I mean, if you use this tool every single year, which is what we hope utilities would do, is to update this tool every year, then you would be able to adjust your rates in a way that you would not be exceeding these targets in the future. It will be rare that this tool will predict that your reserves are going to exceed your target next year or next 2 years, unless you already have very, very high rates and low capital costs. If that's the case, maybe you should put some more capital projects in the next couple of years and spend down your reserves as well. Thank you for the question. The last thing on the data input 1 page is a little bit of information about residential and non-residential customers, the number of them, what the average, the total monthly use is in thousands of gallons. So in this case, 50 million gallons per year being sold to these 8,000 customers. 20 million per year is being sold to this 1,000 customer base, non-residential. And then how quickly are these accounts growing? So again, it's a linear growth rate. So the 8,000 customers, residential customers, are growing at 1% per year. But we also break up the change in the average water use. We know for a fact in the country, in the United States, that at least average residential water use is declining over time. And that's for many reasons. So you can adjust for that. You might be a growing customer base, but you might be, your customers might be using a little bit less each year. So the net effect might either be an increase or a decrease in your total demand, but this tool needs both in order to estimate what your revenues will be based on the rates that are being projected. And then the tool, just for point of reference, gives you what the estimated average water use is based on the information that you've provided here. So the 50 million gallons sold to 8,000 customers amounts to about 6,250 gallons per month. So it gives you a rough idea of whether or not you may have entered in a wrong number. So if you put in 50 instead of 50,000, you'll see that this number just doesn't make sense to you. That's it for the first worksheet. The second worksheet is where you input the capital projects. What you can do is you can put up to 42 different projects down the line. Each line here is a separate capital project. Doesn't mean every single asset, it just means project. So you might have a project that covers multiple assets at the same time. So you type in a name for that project. When do you expect to start construction? And we're currently in fiscal year 14, which means that you can only start fiscal year 15 or above. So when do you expect to start construction? How many years will it take for you to complete construction? And the model assumes that you wouldn't start paying debt service until after construction has been completed. What is the expected construction cost? Whether that's in terms of the start year. So in fiscal year 2013, you're estimating that you will actually pay $2 million in nominal terms in 2013, or if you know what the project cost might be in today's dollars, then you would put in the value in the today column and what the annual rate of construction cost increases you expect. So this $2.2 million in fiscal year 14 by fiscal year 17 in 3 years' time, growing at 2.8% per year, will mean that by fiscal year 17 you're going to end up paying $2.39 million instead of 2.2. So you can adjust for inflation basically through this column. If you need information about inflation factors, I would click on this button here, which talks about construction cost index and what those levels have been historically. If you know that you'll be receiving any grants or principal forgiveness, you would put that number in here in nominal terms, because then it will subtract it out of what your estimated cost is in the start year. So that $2 million here, you subtract out 1,000 and for grants, but you're still liable for $1.9 million that you have to pay somehow. So how do you actually pay for these projects? You have a choice between capital reserves or debt financing. And if you select debt financing, then these two cells appear where you have to type in the number of years, the term of the debt, and what the interest rate is for that debt. Or if you've got capital reserves, then at what year do you start saving ahead of time for this project? And you can see that for this project, which we said would start construction in fiscal year 23, you can pick any year up to fiscal year 23. So I want to start saving fiscal year 15, start saving starting next year. Well, the model then will start raising rates slowly starting next year in order to have enough revenue to pay for this project. Or maybe you don't want to start raising rates this early for a project that's going to happen in fiscal year 23, so you specify that you won't start raising your rates until a later year. And the last thing is this additional annual O&M costs that you expect. So this is the net effect on your annual O&M costs that are expected because of this project. So this project, let's see, doesn't have a title. Let's say this project, project number 4. It's a project that will create some energy efficiencies for the water system. So maybe you're installing some new, more efficient treatment technologies, which you're estimating will reduce your O&M expenses by $250,000 a year. So you put in a negative number here, or if you expect this new infrastructure is going to cost you some more because it's a new pump or something like that, then you can adjust it here. If at any point you entered in too much information that will confuse the model, you'll see an automatic error message here that spells out what the error has been. So you can go back and fix that problem. That's it on the input side. On the outputs, like I said, you've got the 20-year projection. So we start off fiscal year 14, and then you go all the way to fiscal year 34. And it will show you what the projected fund balance is. This is what your revenues will be. This is what your expenses, your net income, and what your end balance, your end reserve or end fund balance will be at the end of this year. Earlier I mentioned that the model already knows that you're going to end up with lower revenues, a lower account balance than the target, and you'll see that if your numbers of your fund balance is lower than your target, it will automatically show up in red. So in this case, fiscal year 14, they're going to have too low of a balance, which means they have to have a rate increase. It does show some more information for each year. It shows every single project and when you'll end up paying for each project, or when do you start saving. So this project number 2 is a debt finance one. So debt service starts in fiscal year 17 and carries on from there. This project number 2, the capital reserve finance portion, was going to start paying for it, I guess, or start saving for it in fiscal year 17. So you'll see these rate increases happening at this point. At the very top, that's when you see the estimated rate changes needed to maintain the fund balance. Like I said, this tool will automatically show what your rates might need to, how they need to adjust in order to be able to continue to fund or to provide enough, high enough a fund balance at the end of the year to meet your target. And I misspoke earlier. I said that the tool will automatically know that you need a rate increase. Well, this utility actually doesn't, because the number of customers was growing at fast enough rate that the new revenues being generated from the customer base was going to bring them up to their target anyway. But 3 years down the line, the tool is estimating that they would need to raise rates by 2.6%, or 76 cents for a monthly bill at 5,000 gallons, which is really low. Or on the base charge, a 32-cent increase on the base charge. That 2.6% increase in the bill brings up the monthly charge from $29.35 to $30.11. So you can see what the average bill would be in the next 20 years. And that's needed in order to make sure that you have enough revenue, again, to have high enough fund balance here. This is a pretty long spreadsheet, and I know some of you are financially minded, so you might actually want all this data, and you can click on any of these and copy and paste the data into a separate spreadsheet, or you can just look at the graphs. And the graphs in the dashboard show you 6 different things. Really quickly, we'll show you what the first thing is, the end of year fund balance, the reserve account. And this shows you the dark blue is the total fund balance here. The orange section is the portion of the fund balance that the tool is already setting aside for a cash finance project in the future. So if you've got a project that's going to happen, we know it's got a project that happens in fiscal year 23, and you need to start saving ahead of time for that project because you're paying for it in cash. Well, this accounts for that money that you've saved ahead of time for that project, and as soon as that project happens, you use up that fund. So the orange and blue lines here are mirrored in the second graph, where you'll see the total expenses, capital expenses, based on what you put in here. So there are no projects that start before fiscal year 17. So the next 3 years, there's nothing, but you'll end up paying X amount of funds every year, and then the orange part is cash finance versus the total capital expense. So in this year, about half of their project is going to be cash finance, and the other half is debt finance. So that just gives you a visual picture of where you're expecting a really significant year on capital finance. This graph shows you the rate increases. The red bars shows you the % increase expected, or the smoothed out rate increases that the model is projecting in order to make sure you have enough funds. And the blue line shows you what the average bill at 5,000 gallons would be after these rate increases. So after that 2.6% increase, they go up from $29.35 to $30.11, and it goes up from there. This graph is an interesting one just to show you what the cumulative investments, capital investments have been or will be in the next 20 years. So basically it takes the sum, or the cumulative sum, of each of these blue bars that you see in the top graph to give you an idea of how much you'll have spent by the end of 20 years for capital projects. This graph down here shows you the revenues and non-capital expenses that are projected from the model. Again, you can see that in the in this table down here. And you want to see, usually you want to see the blue line, which is your revenues, exceeding your non-capital expenses, at least that. If it ever drops below, then you'll see that you're actually going to start eating into your reserve funds, which is fine too. The model does sometimes allow for that to happen, to have expenses higher than revenues and just not have a rate increase, or not even have a negative rate increase, in order to make sure that your fund balance does not get to be too large. The last graph shows you the non-allocated financial reserves as a percent of your non-capital expenses. So basically, it's this. Let's say this 53% in fiscal year 15 means that your financial reserves, this blue section of the financial reserve, that's not allocated for a project yet. It's not being saved for a cash finance project. Accounts for 53% of what your non-capital expenses are. So it gives you just a scalar point of reference in terms of how much are you putting into your reserves, or are you saving in your reserves, not allocated for a specific project yet, in terms of your O&M budget each year. And usually you don't want, I mean, you could have more than 100% of your O&M, which means you have more than a year's worth of O&M put into a reserve fund that's not used, that's not being allocated for a project right now. In this case, this utility is only saving about 80, about 60 or so % of their O&M expenses. I know this was a little bit about a quick overview of the tool. I'm going to ask at this point, before I move on to resources, if there are any questions from the audience that we want to address right now, or just keep going until the end.
I think we'll just keep going until the end, Shadi.
Okay, thank you. So I got another, for the next minute or so, just really briefly on what the resources are that I mentioned earlier. Again, these PowerPoint slides are going to be available to you, and this webinar is being recorded, so you can always come back and see the links and click on the links. There's an asset management handbook that EPA has produced for small water systems. It's a step-by-step guide with some workbooks that you can fill in. So if you don't have a CIP or an asset management plan, this is a very, very good, very simple asset management guidebook that helps you go step by step. To do capital planning, you need to have some kind of idea of what the estimated life is for different types of assets. So this book, it's a separate book that EPA has produced called Taking Stock of Your Water System, has some kind of rules of thumb on some types of equipment and some types of assets, which might be helpful to you. We always recommend that you talk to the vendor, talk to whoever's installed the assets for you, to get a better sense of when you might expect these utilities to need replacement or rehabilitation. Our tool is not the only CIP tool out there. EPA does have a separate tool. It's called CUPS, which you can download. This requires that you download and run this tool on, I think, on Windows. And this one is a little more complicated, a little more detailed. It produces a lot more information than our CIP tool does. One thing it does do, which we find very helpful, is that you can click on this button here and print My Checkup Reports. And based on whatever information you've entered here, it will spit out a Word document that's basically a CIP plan. So it does your documentation for you as well. It's a helpful tool. It does require a lot more time to sit down and fill it out than our simplified version that I just demonstrated. We have some resource pages on our website on capital planning, including this one. If you go to our website and search for capital planning resources, which has a lot of links to other guidebooks, other resources that you can download, which I don't have slides for it here. Or you can go to this website, which we've created for the small water system. So this is a project that we're doing with EPA, where we're providing financial assistance, not financial assistance, we're providing direct assistance to small water systems serving fewer than 10,000 people on issues of asset management, rates and finance, water loss reduction, energy management, leadership, regionalization. If you go to this website, efcnetwork.org, and look under resources and trainings at the very top, you'll see a lot of resources, a lot of guidebooks, a lot of tools including the CIP tool, where you can download and use it for your system. Also helpful for medium-sized utilities. Larger utilities might require something a little more complicated. And as David mentioned, we just completed the rate survey for the state of Alabama. So if you haven't yet had a chance to look at the Alabama Water and Wastewater Rates dashboard, this is an interactive tool that allows you to compare your rates to other utilities' rates and look at things like cost recovery and affordability and conservation signaling as well. Please look at this tool and provide feedback to David or to anybody at ADEM as well. We have other financial tools and other sort of Excel do-it-yourself tools as well available on our website. I don't have time to describe every one of them, but if you go to efc.sog.unc.edu and look under resources tools, just like how you found this current one, you'll find a lot of other tools that you can download and use for your financial planning purposes. Last poll question I've got is to ask, actually I might have one more. So under the small systems project that we're doing for EPA, the Smart Management for Small Water Systems, we can provide free in-depth one-on-one advising for any water system serving up to 10,000 people. That in-depth assistance, David, you can go ahead and launch the poll. That in-depth assistance can be on any of these topics. So if you're a water system that serves less than 10,000 and you would like us to talk to you and help you with any of these issues, asset management planning, capital planning, including using this tool, rates and rate setting, or benchmarking financial performance, energy management, click all that apply, and we will contact you and work with you. And in-depth assistance means that this is not going to be a one-off quick answer to a question. This will be a back and forth between you and us. You can think of us as almost like free consultants up to a certain level. We can't spend a year doing this with you, but we can spend a few weeks, a little bit back and forth to assist you in any of these topics. Thank you. And for interest of time, we won't show the results of this. And the last thing is you can go on our website or to view our blog, efc.web.unc.edu, to learn a little bit more about water system financial management. On this, we do have a specific blog focused specifically on the question of how quickly are costs rising related to capital projects. So what is the construction cost index? The short answer is about 3% per year right now, but it kind of fluctuates from year to year. It's an interesting blog post that I recommend that you read for your CIP planning purposes. If you're interested in signing up for a poll for our blog, please go ahead and indicate that. And this is we probably publish one blog per week on the water side, so this won't inundate your email accounts, but if you're interested, feel free to let us know. All right, thank you. And I apologize, I've gone over a couple of minutes, but if there are any questions right now, I think what we're going to do, just so that I'll respond by email to all the questions that we may have received, just because I think, unfortunately, we've run out of time. But feel free to contact me or David, and you'll see our emails in just a second. If you have some more questions that you just haven't had time to submit to us through the questions box. And at this point, thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it over to David to close out this webinar.
Thank you very much, Shadi. Any of you who have time now, you should be seeing on your screen in just a second here a link to the Qualtrics survey. That shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes tops to tell us about your experience with the webinar today. If you don't have time to do that right now, then you will see that coming to you by email later, along with the link to the slides and the video. I want to say thank you to everyone for attending. A pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Again, as Shadi said, remember you can send us any other questions you have offline and we'll get back to you. I want to thank ADEM again for the sponsorship of this workshop, And let anybody you know who'd be interested in this topic but wasn't able to be here today, we are repeating it 2 days from now on Thursday, September the 25th, for the last webinar in this series. So thank you very much and have a great afternoon.